My name is Margaret Ellison, and I am 67 years old. I live in a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in Oakville, Ontario, a house my late husband Gerald and I bought together 31 years ago. I have a pension of $6,200 a month from my 34 years as a high school English teacher, a savings account with just over $200,000 in it, and as of 8 months ago, absolutely nothing left in my refrigerator except a half-empty jar of mustard and some expired yogurt. I want you to think about that for a moment. $6,200 a month, $200,000 in savings, an empty refrigerator. My sister called me one Tuesday afternoon in March, and when I finally answered, I almost didn't, because I had been sleeping more than usual those days, mostly out of exhaustion I couldn't explain. She said, "Margaret, your voice sounds wrong. What's happening?" And I said, "Nothing. I'm fine." Because that is what I had been saying for 8 months. Nothing. Fine. Everything is fine. It wasn't fine. But let me start at the beginning, because none of this happened overnight. That's the thing people don't understand when they hear a story like mine. They think, how could you let it get that far? They think, I would have done something. But what they don't understand is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives the way winter does in Ontario, so gradually, one gray day at a time, that by the time you realize you're frozen, you've already forgotten what warmth felt like. Gerald died 26 months before any of this began. A stroke, fast and without warning, on a Sunday morning in January while he was making coffee. He was 68. We had been married 41 years. I don't have the words for what that kind of loss does to a person, so I won't try. What I will say is that the silence in a house where someone used to be is a different kind of silence than any other. It has a weight to it. It presses down on you. My daughter Claire was living in Calgary at the time with her husband Daniel. They had been married 6 years. Daniel was a project manager for a mid-size construction company, and Claire worked part-time at a dental office. They had a nice apartment in the southwest end of the city. I had visited them twice, and both times Daniel had been perfectly pleasant, charming even, good at conversation, good at remembering details, the kind of man who always refills your glass before you ask. I liked him. I want to be clear about that. I genuinely liked him. When Gerald died, Claire flew home immediately and stayed for 3 weeks. She was tender and attentive and sat with me through all the paperwork and the funeral arrangements and the long, quiet evenings when I couldn't bear to watch television but also couldn't bear the silence. When she had to go back to Calgary, we hugged in the driveway for a long time. She said, "Call me every day, Mom." I said I would. I did for a while. But grief has a way of making you feel like a burden, and after a few months I started calling less. I didn't want to be the sad mother on the phone. I wanted Claire to have her life. 14 months after Gerald's passing, Claire called me with news that she framed carefully, the way you frame things you're worried someone won't take well. Daniel's company had lost a major contract. He had been laid off. They had been managing on Claire's income, but the apartment was expensive, and they were behind on 2 months' rent. They didn't want to ask, she said, but they were wondering just temporarily whether they might come and stay with me in Oakville while Daniel looked for new work, just for a few months, until he got back on his feet. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Of course I did. She was my daughter. The house had 4 empty rooms and a mother rattling around in it who hadn't cooked a real meal for another person in over a year. I was, if I am being honest with myself, relieved. I thought it would be good for all of us. They arrived on a Friday in late April with 2 cars packed full and Daniel's easy smile and Claire's grateful hug, and for the first few weeks everything was genuinely lovely. I cooked Sunday dinners. Daniel fixed the leaking tap in the upstairs bathroom that I had been meaning to call a plumber about for months. Claire and I watched old movies in the evenings and talked the way we used to when she was young. The house felt like a house again. The first conversation about money happened in the 6th week. Daniel sat down with me at the kitchen table after dinner one evening. Claire had gone upstairs and spread out some papers. He told me he had been doing some research into my financial situation, and he thought there were some things I should know. He said it in that pleasant, measured way he had, the way that made everything sound reasonable. He said my savings account was earning almost no interest, which was true. He said there were better options. He said he had contacts in the investment world from his years in construction, and he thought he could help me make my money work harder. I told him I was comfortable with how things were. He nodded and said, "Of course, Absolutely. No pressure. He just wanted me to be aware. He put the papers away, and that was that. The second conversation happened 3 weeks later. This time, Claire was there. She said, "Mom, Daniel really does know about this stuff. I've seen what he's done with his own portfolio. Daniel talked about GICs and dividend funds and protecting against inflation. I was a school teacher, not a financial advisor. The terms weren't foreign to me, but the details were, and Daniel explained everything with such patience and clarity that it seemed almost rude not to trust him. I still said I needed to think about it. And I want to be clear, I was not naive. I was not a foolish woman. I had managed our household finances for 41 years. But I was lonely, and Daniel was attentive. And Claire was there nodding along, and I told myself that surely my own daughter would not let anything happen to me. The third conversation was gentler than the others. Daniel suggested something smaller to start, just moving a portion of my savings to an account he could help manage. $60,000, as a trial. He showed me documents that looked official. He mentioned a financial firm in Toronto I didn't recognize but could have looked up if I had thought to. He said I could have it back whenever I wanted. And I thought, just for a few months, just while he gets settled. I signed the papers. 3 weeks later, he asked about the rest. I think about that moment often. The moment I should have stopped. I was sitting at that same kitchen table with the afternoon light coming through the window over the sink, and Daniel put the papers in front of me and said, "Margaret, I think we should move the rest of your savings into the same structure. I've already seen gains on the first amount." He showed me a statement. Numbers in a column. I didn't ask to see the underlying account. I didn't call my own bank. I told myself I was being a modern woman, trusting someone with expertise. I signed those papers too. The thing that happened next is the thing I have gone over in my mind more times than I can count. Not because I can't explain it, but because I understand it too well, and that understanding is its own kind of shame. I am a woman who spent 34 years teaching 17-year-olds to think critically, to question sources, to never take things at face value. And I gave a man I had known for 3 years complete access to my life savings because I was afraid of being alone, and I wanted to believe that my family was taking care of me. Within 2 months of signing over the second amount, I began to notice things. The first thing was the grocery bags. They came home with bags every week, good cuts of meat, wine, specialty items from the organic market on Lakeshore, but when I asked Claire to pick up my blood pressure medication on one of those trips, she came home empty-handed and said the pharmacy had been out of stock. This happened twice. The second thing was the sofa. I came downstairs one morning and the sofa in the sitting room, a deep green velvet one that Gerald and I had bought on our 25th anniversary, was gone. Daniel said it had been damaged by a water stain from a leaking plant, and they'd disposed of it. I had not seen a stain, but I let it go. The third thing was my debit card. I had given Daniel my debit card early on. He had offered to manage the grocery runs and the household bills while I rested, which at the time had seemed considerate. But when I asked for the card back to make a small withdrawal for a birthday card and some cash, he said the card was at the bank, something about an update to the account. He would get it sorted. I said I could go to the bank myself. He said he had already arranged it, no need. I did not go to the bank. And I am still not entirely sure why. I think because the alternative, admitting to myself what might be happening, was more frightening than the discomfort of not having my card. By the time summer ended, I had not received a single statement for the investment account. My pension was still depositing into my checking account, but every time I tried to review the balance online, Daniel had a reason why the system was showing incorrect figures, an update, a migration, something technical. I am not good with computers. He knew that. In September, I woke up at 3 a.m. and lay in the dark and thought, very clearly and calmly, I need to know what is in my accounts. I did not say anything to Daniel. I did not say anything to Claire. I got up the next morning as normal, had coffee, waited for Daniel to take Claire to her dental appointment across town. She had started having work done at a clinic in Mississauga, and then I put on my coat and my shoes, and I walked to the TD branch on Kerr Street. What the teller told me took a moment to fully register. My savings account had a balance of $12.41. My checking account, where my pension deposited, had been drawn down to $318. The bills for the house were coming out of it, yes, but there should have been several thousand remaining. I asked the teller to print me a transaction history for the last 6 months. I sat down in one of the chairs by the window and I read every line. The transfers were regular and large, 12,000 here, 8,000 there, several in the 4,500 range, all authorized with my debit card and PIN. The investment accounts Daniel had described did not appear anywhere in TD's system. They were not TD products. I sat in that chair for a long time. I want to tell you that I went home and confronted them, that I walked back in the front door and told them to get out. But that is not what I did. What I did was fold the transaction history into my coat pocket, walk home, and sit in the kitchen and think. Because Daniel was clever, and if I came at him without a plan, I knew he would explain everything away and I would doubt myself again. I had doubted myself for 8 months. I knew exactly how it felt, so I did something that took me 2 days to work up to. I went to the Staples on the main street and I bought a small digital voice recorder, the kind that looks like a USB drive. And I started recording. I did not record constantly. I recorded at the kitchen table, where most of the conversations happened. I kept the recorder in my cardigan pocket. I told myself I was just gathering information, the same way I used to tell my students that before you can argue a point, you need evidence. In the 3rd week of October, I had what I needed. Daniel had been on the phone in the kitchen. He often took calls there now. I think because he had stopped worrying about me, and I heard him say quite clearly to someone on the other end, "The pension is still coming in. We've got at least another 4 or 5 months before she puts it together. By then the whole thing will be restructured." He laughed at something the other person said. He said, "No, she's fine. She doesn't really know what she's looking at." I was standing in the hallway. I had the recorder in my pocket. I did not move until I heard him hang up. That evening I called my sister Patricia from the upstairs bathroom with the fan running. Patricia is 64 and lives in Hamilton, and she was a bookkeeper for 22 years before she retired. She is the most practical person I have ever known. When I told her everything, the transfers, the fake investment accounts, the phone call, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Okay, don't touch anything and don't say anything. I'm calling someone." The someone Patricia called was a lawyer, a friend of hers from her bookkeeping days who specialized in financial fraud. His name was Robert Chen, and within 48 hours he had reviewed my bank statements, listened to the recordings, and advised me on exactly what to do next. What I want you to understand is that the hardest part of what came next was not the logistics. It was my daughter. I had not allowed myself to think too carefully about Claire's role in all of this. I had told myself she didn't know. I had held on to that. But sitting across from Robert Chen while he laid out the transaction history, I had to ask myself honestly, how much can a woman not know about what is happening in someone else's house when she is living in that house? And I didn't have an answer I was comfortable with. Patricia drove up from Hamilton on a Saturday morning in early November, and she brought Robert Chen's associate, a paralegal named Sandra, who helped me with the paperwork. The plan was straightforward. I had already called my branch and placed a fraud alert on my accounts with the transaction history as evidence. The Halton Regional Police Financial Crimes Unit had been notified. Robert had advised me to say nothing to Daniel or Claire until everything was in place. The moment came at Sunday dinner. It was a coincidence of timing in a way. My neighbor Donna and her husband Paul had been invited weeks before. This was before everything unfolded, and they were already there when Patricia arrived. 5 adults around the table I had sat at my entire adult life, and Daniel at the head of it, perfectly pleasant, refilling wine glasses, talking about the Leafs game. Patricia waited until the main course was on the table. Then she looked at Daniel and said, very calmly, "I spoke to Robert Chen this week about Margaret's accounts." Daniel's expression didn't change immediately. That was the thing he was practiced at: composure. He said, "Oh?" in an easy tone. Patricia put the bank statements on the table. She put a printed summary that Sandra had prepared. She said, $200,000 and the better part of 8 months' worth of her pension are unaccounted for, Daniel. Would you like to explain that to all of us? And then something happened that I had not expected and have not forgotten. Daniel looked at Claire, and Claire looked at her plate. That was when I knew. Not completely, not all the details, but enough. Claire had known more than she had let on. I don't know how much. I don't know what she told herself to make it acceptable, but she looked at her plate, and she didn't say a word in my defense, and something in my chest that had been hoping very hard simply stopped hoping. Daniel tried. He was good at trying. He said the accounts were structured differently. that there were documents, that Patricia didn't understand the full picture. He said it in that smooth, reasonable voice. But Donna was sitting right there, and Donna's husband Paul, and Patricia didn't flinch, and the bank statements were on the table in black and white, and somewhere between the fourth and fifth sentence of his explanation, Daniel seemed to realize that the room had changed. He stopped talking. Paul said quietly, "Daniel, I think you should be very careful about what you say next." The Halton Police Financial Crimes Unit came to the house on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. I was not there. Patricia had insisted I stay with her in Hamilton, and I did. By the time I returned to my house on Oakville, Daniel and Claire were gone. The investigation took months. I will not pretend it was simple or clean. Daniel had moved my savings through several accounts. Some of it was genuinely gone, spent on credit card debt, a lease on a vehicle I never knew about, cash withdrawals. I don't want to imagine the purpose of. Some of it was recoverable. Robert Chen was optimistic about the civil case. The criminal case was proceeding separately. Claire called me from Calgary. She had gone back. Alone, I was told in January. I let it go to voicemail. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known everything, only some of it, and that she had told herself it wasn't her place to interfere between a husband and his financial decisions. She said she loved me. I have listened to that message several times. I believe that she loved me. I also believe that love is not the same as loyalty, and loyalty is not the same as courage, and courage was what the moment required. I am still working through what I feel about my daughter. I am not ready to speak to her yet. Patricia says there is no timeline I have to follow. Robert Chen says the civil case may require Claire's testimony, and we will cross that bridge when we come to it. What I want to tell you, and I want to tell you this plainly, because I spent 34 years teaching young people to say what they mean, is that it did not happen because I was foolish. It happened because I was grieving and isolated, and someone I trusted used both of those things deliberately. The shame belongs to Daniel, not to me. It took me a long time to believe that. I believe it now. I have my house. I have Patricia. I have a financial advisor at TD, named Louise, whom I met with for 2 hours last month, and she is helping me understand what is recoverable and what I need to rebuild. I have Donna next door who brings soup on Tuesdays without being asked, and I have this, the knowledge that I am the one who figured it out. I am the one who walked to the bank. I am the one who bought the recorder. I am the one who called my sister. Not because someone rescued me, because I decided to stop being afraid of what I might find and start looking anyway. I am 67 years old. I taught high school English for 34 years. I know how stories end, and I know that the ending is rarely the most important part. The most important part is the moment the main character decides to stop waiting and act. That Tuesday morning in September, putting on my coat and my shoes while the house was quiet, walking to the bank on Kerr Street, that was my moment. It was enough.